Hi, I'm William Spaniel. Let's learn about international relations. Today's topic is pandering to Ohio and Florida. I've already given away the punchline of this lecture, so let's just move on to our big question here, which is how do electoral systems distort foreign policy? I want you to take a look at the last 4 presidential electoral maps in the United States. This is from 2000 forward. In 2000, I was in 8th grade, so this is really when I first started paying attention to United States politics and being able to comprehend and think about what's going on. And if you've been following United States politics since 2000 forward, then you should know what I'm about to say here is true. It's that the Declaration of Independence says that all men are created equal, but really it should be saying that all men are created equal, but voters living in Ohio and Florida are more equal than others. Let's think about presidential politics strategically for a moment here. Voters in California are going to be voting Democrat, and voters in Texas are going to be voting for Republican unless one of these parties massively reforms its platform. And this is going to be true for most states. Most states are going to be solid Democratic states or solid Republican states, and that's not going to be changing. However, there are a very few set of states, and specifically Ohio and Florida are the most populous of these states, that are really up in the air, that tiny changes to candidate policy can actually affect whether Ohio and Florida, for example, vote Democrat or Republican. And so as a result, candidates have to be really sensitive to the feelings of Ohioans and Floridians because their chances of being elected are really tied to how responsive they are to the desires of Ohio and Florida. And to see this in action, I want you to look at the following question. This is a question not directed to you, but rather directed in polls previously. Do you think the United States should reestablish diplomatic and trade relations with Cuba? Keep in mind that at present, the United States does not have diplomatic or trade relations with Cuba. I want you to take a guess here. The percentage of Americans who think that we should establish diplomatic and trade relations. What percentage of Americans would answer yes to this question? Think about that for a moment, and if you have the ability to, go to the comments section right now and type in your answer. What percentage of Americans say yes to this question? And once you've done that, I will now reveal the answer. The answer is 67%. So a solid 2/3 majority think that we should be warming up our relations with Cuba. Only 20% said no and 13% are unsure. So we see a 2/3 majority say we need to do this with Cuba, and yet despite having a 2/3 majority, we don't actually see this in action. We don't see these relations thawing. Why is that the case? Well, this is one theory at least, is pandering. Most people don't have a particularly strong feeling about whether we should reestablish trade relations and diplomatic relations with Cuba. But I can tell you one group who does have particularly strong feelings about this, and that's older Cuban immigrants who were living in Cuba at some point before they came over here under the Castro regime. And it just so happens that these Cuban migrants are centered in Florida, and Florida is a really important state if you're trying to win the presidency. And so as a result, to try to make sure that we're going to be keeping these older Floridians voting for us, we are maintaining our position that we don't want to warm up the relations with Cuba. Now, in general, this is something that's important here. Older voters vote more frequently than younger voters, and so as a result, candidates tweak their policies accordingly to make sure they're winning the older vote because that's the guys who are actually voting. It's interesting to note that younger Cubans don't share the same belief. A slight majority of younger Cubans actually feel that we should be reestablishing trade relations with Cuba. So this is something that we'll probably be seeing switch over in the next 10 years or so. You can kind of see it currently with the Obama administration being a little bit lighter with Cuba. I would expect that to continue purely because older Cubans are going to be dying more quickly than younger Cubans. And so once they are removed from the electoral voting cycles, we'll see that this policy will switch over. But either way, you can see how this electoral incentive to win voters over in Florida is manipulating the system, and it's distorting United States policy. And we can see this elsewhere too. So let's switch over to trade relations. If you remember back to the 4th unit, when we talked about trade specifically, we know that on the whole, states are better off eliminating tariffs than engaging in trade wars. So we should be preferring the world where no trade, or rather no tariffs exist, and we have free trade, and states are able to specialize in what they're better at and use comparative advantage to their benefit than to be having high tariffs and essentially be only trading within the country and not being able to benefit from those gains from trade, which essentially create something from nothing. It's important to note that there are winners and losers here. Now, the reason that we say that it's better to get rid of these tariffs than to have them is because the amount that the winners are going to be winning by is going to be more than the amount that the losers are losing by. So getting rid of these tariffs is efficient, but individually, some people are going to be winning and some people are going to be losing. So think about a steel company in the United States. They're going to want to have tariffs on imported steel. This is going to make steel more expensive for U.S. consumers who are trying to purchase the steel because they're going to have the tariffs on the imported steel, which is going to make those prices higher. And so the steel companies within the United States can benefit from this by raising their prices and having more people purchase their steel, the U.S. domestic steel, at higher prices. This is good for the producers of the steel in the United States, but obviously bad for the consumers of steel in the United States because they're paying more. But it just so happens that steel companies in the United States are collected in Ohio, also in Pennsylvania too. It's called the Rust Belt. So you see a lot of steel companies in Ohio who want to have these steel tariffs, and you can actually look back at some of the discussion about the 2002 bill that George W. Bush signed to increase the tariffs on steel. This was essentially a political power play where George W. Bush is having a platform mostly of free trade, but to make sure that he's winning over voters in Ohio, he's keeping tariffs on foreign steel to make these steel companies in Ohio happy. Either way, there's an obvious takeaway here, and it's that electoral rules distort international outcomes. And that wraps up our topic, or in our section and our unit, on how leaders and leader incentives can affect international relations. So I hope you learned something from this unit. I hope you saw why studying leaders is important. And in the next unit, we're going to switch things over entirely, and we're going to start talking about the United Nations Security Council. So again, I hope you enjoyed this unit. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye.